All right, let's pick up where we left off. Remember, we were speaking about events and we needed to understand the two most important things in order to master events, and those were event listeners and event handlers. Right now, I want us to concentrate on this listener. And in particular, I want to look at the different ways we can add listeners to an element. And to jog your memory, there were three ways. There were three different ways we could add listeners to elements. Inline event listeners, inline properties, and event listeners. I know it's weird, it's not very intuitive, but I want us to discuss each one, and then in doing so, you'll have a much more intuitive feel for how they work. So, I guess there's no better place to start than with the very first method, inline event listeners. Now, what I want us to do is I want us to assume we have a button on our page, and when that button is clicked, all we're wanting to do is alert boom to the user. A very simple page, nothing fancy. So then how would we go about writing this? Well, firstly, we need our HTML. Our HTML will consist of a button element. Within the button element, this is where our magic happens. As you can see, we write onClick. We assign that to a function called boom. Don't worry too much about how this all works and where we get that onClick. For now, just realize that that onClick event or that onClick word is provided to us by the DOM API. We then assign it to the value of boom. And that boom, in our case, is going to be JavaScript. It's going to be a JavaScript function that we execute, which means, yes, we have to write JavaScript. We can put this inline in script tags, or it can be in an external file. But here we go. We've got our JavaScript. We define a function called boom. And yes, we just alert boom to the screen. This, my dear students, is an inline event listener. But let me show you how it works. Let me just jump to our coding editor and let's see it in action. Okay, let's see how an inline event listener works. And in this course, you're going to be seeing me use Visual Studio Code a lot. Firstly, it's free. Secondly, it's awesome. And thirdly, we have to use a text editor, and this is just the one I chose. Now, when I'm using Visual Studio Code, I also use a plugin called Live Server. And what Live Server does at its very basic core is it allows me to run my computer as a server. So what I can do is when I change things in the HTML, it automatically updates and refreshes the browser. If you want to know more, please ask me in Q&A. Otherwise, it's super simple to download Visual Studio Code, look at the extensions tab, and then download Live Server. But enough said, let's look at an inline event listener and how it works. The starting point is to write our HTML. You can see here I've got a blank page. So let's just set up a very blank HTML template. Then I want to create a body tag. Within our body tag, let's insert this button. And of course, let's call it Click Me. And what do we have to do? That's right, we have to add this inline event listener property. And it's called onClick. Again, this is given to us by the DOM API. This isn't a word that I've chosen. We have to use this word, onClick, if we're wanting to listen for the click event. Then the next thing we have to do is we have to then define an event handler that's going to be called every time this event is fired. And in this case, I want to define a function called boom. We went through this, we saw this. So there we go. That's our HTML. But right now, if we save this, and you know what, let me just remove myself quickly. That button you see in the bottom right corner, that is from Live Server. And that allows me to actually display this in a browser live. So let's click that button. And here we go. There's our Click Me button that we defined in our HTML. But if I click that, nothing is happening, right? And if we inspect this document, we should see some sort of error in the console. So here's the console. Let's refresh and let's click the button. Boom is not defined. This makes complete sense, right? And this is why we have to include our JavaScript, because we have to define this boom function. So let's go back to our code. Let's now include script tags. And I know it's not ideal to have inline JavaScript, but you know what? This is such a simple example. It'll be fine for our purposes. All we have to do now is define a function called boom. Of course, we have to use the function keyword in JavaScript. We then define our function name, which in this instance is called boom. And in the curly braces, this is where we can define the meat of our function. In this case, we just want to alert boom to the screen. So if we save this, go back to our browser, let's remove this now. And if we click this button, boom, we've got that alert. How cool was this? And this is an inline event listener. Awesome. I'm sure you can see how easy and intuitive it actually is. And FYI, did you know that this inline event listener is the earliest method of registering event handlers found on the web? Pretty interesting, eh? So this is kind of like the starting point. This was the entry point into event listeners. How cool. And it might seem easy to use this event handler attribute if you're just going to do something really quick, but they'll quickly become unmanageable and inefficient. But anyway, we're going to be discussing more of this later. Let me not give you a spoiler alert.